Hi there, Pascal from Western Canoe and Kayak. Today I want to talk about composite construction for kayaks and why that might be something to consider if you're thinking about buying a kayak. So one of the great advantages of composite construction is it gives you a great ability to control the shape. Unlike some other manufacturing techniques, you can get some really aggressive chines and really fine bows and sterns and just get great geometry that you might not be able to do in something like a thermoformed boat or a rotomolded polyethylene boat. Another great thing is a composite boat has phenomenal stiffness compared to, again, a rotomolded boat or a thermoformed boat. The material is much stiffer, much less flexible, so when you're paddling, all your energy is going into movement or into controlling your boat, as opposed to getting wasted as the hull flexes. This is in part due to the material, just its natural properties, but also with a composite construction, you can add reinforcement to specific areas, unlike some other manufacturing processes. So on this example, it's actually got some extra reinforcement right in the keel, where it's going to need more stiffness and more toughness because it may have impacts. When you're paddling along, you might whack into a rock, right? Another thing that's great about composite boats is the lifespan can be virtually unlimited. If you do damage it, you can repair it. It's not especially difficult. Really just depends on how much work you want to put in, but you can have a composite boat last decades without too much trouble. Another thing that's nice about a composite boat is when it comes time to do outfitting to make it fit just right, very easy to add extra pieces of foam, extra padding, and really customize the fit just to you. It's a little bit trickier in, say, a rotomolded polyethylene boat because the material just does not adhere well with most adhesives. So I had a chance to paddle this boat, and because of its really aggressive chines, it's super fun to throw on edge. It's really dynamic when you're paddling it. And it's quite different from some other offerings. There's not too much out there that's got a chine this aggressive and boxy. So here's a great example of the shaping you can get with composite construction. This chine is incredibly aggressive, going to make edging an absolute dream. Really fun boat to paddle because of the shaping that's along this chine. This is not a shape that you could do particularly well out of like a rotomolded polyethylene. It would be really susceptible to oil canning, to getting dents. A thermoformed boat I just don't think would have the required stiffness, whereas with a composite construction, they can add extra reinforcement along the chines, along the keel, give you a really robust and stiff boat that you can still paddle in some great conditions. So that's what I really like about the shape that you can get with composite. As I alluded to a little bit, thermoformed boats, they have flexibility. The material's stiffer than polyethylene, but it's still quite flexible. But this is a thermoformed boat. Quite a lot of flexibility. Now, you're unlikely to be encountering a pair of feet stomping on your boat while you're paddling, but you can see there's a lot of flexibility in that design. Similarly, rotomolded polyethylene, very tough material, but also quite flexible. I have no hesitancy to jump on it, not going to damage anything, but it's quite flexible. So when you're on the water and that hull is flexing a little, it is robbing you of energy. Now, for most paddling, that's not the end of the world, but if you're after a performance craft, that's where a really rigid craft like a composite is going to excel. And it's difficult to add more reinforcing because you're constrained to having an even thickness of material across the whole boat. Certain manufacturers may be able to control that a little bit, but nowhere near the amount that you can dial in the thickness of the layup with a composite construction. So you can add specific reinforcement, and here's a good one, we'll have to zoom in later, because there's great reinforcement strips added along the keel, coming along the paddler's seat. It gives you a lot of stiffness right where you need it without adding a lot of weight. Yeah, so this is a great example of strategic reinforcing in a boat. So you can see there's an extra layer of material that runs down the keel, as well as these pieces that come off diagonally and meet under the seat. So you can get a lot of stiffness out of a composite construction without adding a lot of weight. In this case, this is a carbon construction, so it's even stiffer and even lighter weight than you'd see in a fiberglass construction. Another thing that's nice about composite boats is if you want to keep that really nice shiny finish, you can just wax them. You can do a cut polish on them. You can maintain them, keep them as shiny as you'd like for decades. That's not something you can do with a polyethylene boat. They tend to go a little bit dull over time, and they're never particularly shiny to begin with. Thermoform boats, you can keep them shiny and looking like new for quite a while, but I don't think anything can really rival a composite boat in terms of the bling factor, right? That being said, a composite boat will show scratches. Depending on the color of it, they can be quite noticeable, but a little bit of elbow grease and most of those scratches will be like they never happened. One thing that's been kind of a drawback, I would say it's been the major drawback for composite boats for a long time, has been the cost. It's been a bit unattainable for a lot of paddlers, certainly something they could aspire to one day paddling, but if it's out of reach financially, you're not going to end up paddling it, right? Thanks to some manufacturers such as Norse, they're doing a production that's vacuum infused, so it's really lightweight, it's really consistent, and they're managing to keep the price down into a range that's affordable for a lot of folks. Certainly more so than some other offerings. So with all boats, the main things that are going to damage them are going to be, well, physical damage, such as a tree falling on them, and the sun. UV is really damaging to most materials. Composites are no exception. So when you're not using it, you want to keep it ideally at least in the shade, preferably covered. So I store my boats with a cockpit cover on them, and that stops critters, spiders and mice and whatnot from getting inside and chewing up the seat and just making a mess. But generally a little bit of care when you're storing them is all it takes to have them last a good long time. Similar could be said about polyethylene or thermoformed boats. The more you can keep them out of the sun, the more you can keep them in a cool, dry place, the better they'll be. I joke that you should store kayaks in the same kind of conditions you'd store potatoes, out of the sun, out of the damp. They'll last a good long time.